Welcome back to the next episode of Real People, Real Hope. I'm Jill Heiser, Vice President of Mission Advancement, and we are coming to you tonight from the Detroit Foundation Hotel. So I'd like to welcome Dave Game, our President and CEO.
Hey, Jill.
Hey, how are you?
Good.
You like this location, don't you?
I'm feeling it.
Yeah, I bet you are.
I'm feeling it.
And Sean DeFore, our COO and Senior Vice President. Hi, Sean.
Hi, Jill.
This is a really unique location because we have a big bay window that looks to downtown Detroit. And as people are walking by, I think they think we might be famous. And so people are taking pictures and stopping and looking. And so we just pretend we are. And it kind of works for us, doesn't it?
I think it's because I'm sitting with my back to it. And
we should have you on the other side.
Head,
you have the Wellspring logo on.
The back of my head looks famous.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So we have a really cool topic that we're going to be really launching. It's something that LeadingAge of really nationally, the membership organization of LeadingAge has been talking about for some time now. But as Wellspring, we've been talking about it a little more internally, and I am really excited to talk about it just with a bigger conversation. So Dave, we have someone pretty special with us that has agreed to spend their evening with us. So I would love for you to introduce her, since you guys have worked together for a long time, and I know your time as LeadingAge board chair has brought you even closer. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
All right. So it is definitely an honor to introduce Katie Smith-Sloan to our podcast tonight. Katie is the CEO of LeadingAge, based in Washington, D.C. As you mentioned, Jill, I've spent a little bit of time with that organization over the years, and in that time, have gotten to know Katie as she has served that organization so well for so long. But she's been president and CEO now for what, Katie? A couple of years, 4 years maybe?
Just a little over 3.
Okay, well, I'm rounding up. So, but let me get a little bit of sort of Katie's credentials, if you will, on the table here for us. So LeadingAge is a membership organization of nonprofit senior service organizations from across the country. So it has a unique position, I think, in the advocacy world, because its voice is that of the nonprofits, and we feel like that gives it some strength and a sort of unique position in Washington and in other places. Katie is serving in that role and leads us just amazingly well. But she's also doing some other things that matter to this conversation. Serving as executive director of the Global Aging Network, which has a presence in over 50 countries around the world.
Wow.
So this is not just a Washington, D.C. national voice, but it is a global voice. She's on the board of directors for the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation in Toronto, and Help Age USA, and Long-Term Quality Alliance. So Katie's life is all about the work in the aging field. And so Katie, I'm really happy to have you with us. So thanks for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you for including me. I'm excited to be here.
So we're going to talk. We could talk about a lot of things with you, and maybe we'll have to do that in some future podcasts as well. But what we really want to talk about tonight is the issue of ageism, which is an issue that LeadingAge has really sort of grabbed a hold of and elevated into the public dialogue. Others have as well, but LeadingAge has really adopted it. And so, Katie, would you just maybe start us off by giving us sort of a working definition of ageism? Because I'm guessing a lot of the folks that will be listening to this haven't really thought about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I'd be happy to, and thanks again for including me on this podcast. So, for ageism is at its core stereotyping and discriminating against individuals or groups on the basis of their age. And with respect to older adults, it's a tendency to view older persons as debilitated or unworthy of attention or unsuitable for employment.
Mm-hmm.
And for us at LeadingAge, we've really looked at this issue deeply, and we recognize that it actually perpetuates powerful and pervasive stereotypes that ultimately demean the individual and impact their quality of life.
So, Katie, I know that when I was transitioning off the board at LeadingAge and you were really coming into your CEO role, there was a really intense strategic planning process you led the board through at that time that led to sort of claiming this as the issue. In fact, LeadingAge really has set a vision that says the vision for LeadingAge is an America freed from ageism. Is that right?
That's exactly right.
So why is this issue so important to LeadingAge?
It's important because ageism really stands in the way of everything that we are trying to do as we try to improve the quality of life for people as they age. By perpetuating stereotypes, negative stereotypes that demean individuals and the impact of their quality of life, it stands in the way of our ability to raise philanthropic dollars. Right now in this country, 2% of philanthropic dollars go to causes associated with aging.
Wow.
And I have to believe at some level that has to do with some level of ageism. It stands in the way of our ability to recruit staff, individuals, to work with people as older adults in their aging journey. It stands in the way of our ability to influence the kinds of public policies that will really support people in their aging journey. So what we discovered as we were going through the strategic planning process is that at the core of the barriers that impact our ability to do so well what organizations like Wellspring do is this sort of insidious bias against older people. And that if we could, as a national organization with a strong, deep commitment to serving the needs of older adults, somehow help to mitigate, to whittle away against this perhaps one of the last isms in this country, we could make a real difference. And I would say that ageism, unlike the other ism, is something that will impact every single person in this country who reaches old age. So it's not just it's not a subset of the population. It's not a small deal. It's a big deal, but it's one that has really it's been under the radar screen for way too long.
So, Katie, I think you just made a really interesting point, and an important one, which is that ageism seems to be one of the last bastions of isms that people don't talk about a lot. There doesn't seem to be a big outcry around. Can you talk a little bit about why you think that is, especially given that at some point all of us will face it if it persists, because we're all going to be older adults at some point?
Well, I think it's a great question, and I think the answer to that is denial. I think that we as a society, actually as a world, I think in many ways, deny the fact that we will grow old and that we are discriminated against as older adults, and that's become normative, sadly. That it's become okay to use to have ageist attitudes, behaviors, and words in our vocabulary. And you see that you see it in Hallmark cards, you see it in television ads, you see it all over the place. And when you start paying attention to the fact that these messages are actually not, they're debilitating, they're demeaning of the aging experience in older adults, then you really begin to wake up to the fact that this is insidious. It's everywhere.
Yeah, and some of those, I mean, imagine, a greeting card that called out some difference in someone, right?
Yeah.
Because of a physical disability or the color of their skin. I mean, we wouldn't stand for that for a hot second. But we have whole rows of these things in the greeting card racks of our stores that just a whole industry around this stuff. And I think too there's a flip side issue for us on this too. Not only does it demean and minimize that elderly person, but when we're also sending messages to our youth, right? And so when we say, when we send the black balloons and the ageist greeting cards for the 50th birthday party, what is that saying to our 15-year-old sons and daughters who are seeing that already under a lot of pressure to produce and feel like they've arrived? And it's no wonder they're under such pressure. Rather than revering age and saying, man, I've got a long time to come into myself, Now we got people, these young people who are really challenged to say, wow, if 50's over the hill and I'm turning 20 in a little while here, what does that say to me about my life? And I think that's just something that we haven't really thought about when we talk about ageism.
Yeah. I was going to ask, Katie, you're a part of the Global Aging Network.
Yeah.
You're the executive director. Do you see the same kind of ageism around the globe? Are there countries that are respecting age and various stages better than we are?
We're seeing it everywhere. And the World Health Organization has actually been doing a lot of work on ageism, combating ageism, and really calling attention to how we think, feel, and act about age and aging, and how it impacts both old and young, to Dave's point, which is a great point. But they have been doing sort of a systematic review of research and articles that have been published on ageism. And what they learned is that 60% of individuals, older individuals in 57 countries, report that older people are not respected in their countries. And that the younger people tend to be, or more likely to be, ageist. And it really impacts their quality of life. So this isn't a U.S. issue. This is a global issue. And I think there's, a lot of a sort of conventional wisdom that in other countries older people are revered, but they, in fact, and they may be, but they still are impacted by ageism.
So, Katie, would you talk a little bit about what you hear from our Leading Age members that do the kind of work we do across the country, and how their understanding ageism is challenging them in their work? What do we know about that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we have been working on a project with Virginia Commonwealth University and have put together a sort of a training program, training manual and video for member organizations to use with their residents, with their staff, with their boards, really calling attention to ageism and trying to institute a conversation about ageism in their communities. And residents have told us through this that they don't like to be called dear or dearie. They view that as ageist. That they are very aware that no one goes to them for help with technology. That the fact that they live in a age segregated community reminds them that they are old. And so the residents are really tuned in to the fact that they are living in an ageist environment, even if it's an age segregated environment, where they're in effect and hopefully celebrating people for whatever age they are.
Right.
Management and staff have really noticed a lot as we bring attention to this, that they don't listen well to their residents and clients. They get they're sort of impatient. They criticize memory issues. They assume disabilities and cognitive deficits just go with aging. They get impatient with food, the food lines and how long it takes people to go through food lines. They don't want to see walkers in the dining room. So there are all these aspects that we haven't really labeled as ageist before, but now that we're focusing on ageism, it's everywhere. Language is a huge issue. You look great for your age. You're 75 years young. You're young at heart. This is a senior moment. I mean, those are all sort of ageist examples of the language that's just become part of our normal lexicon.
Yeah.
And as we begin to call attention to ageism, whether it's in a senior living community or in the community at large, people begin to say, yeah, absolutely. That was not a good thing to have said.
I'm thinking back to when I was young in my career anyways, and starting out and was practicing pharmacy. And when I decided to leave that practice to get into aging services, I can't tell you how many people told me what a dumb career move that was, right? Giving up a perfectly good pharmacy career for working with those old people, is how one of them phrased it. And I didn't understand it then as ageism, but really that's certainly what it was. That why would a sort of up and coming pharmacist throw his career away to go work with those old people, right? And we know that that's true in our schools even today. We've bumped into a university near one of our campuses that was training nurses, and had a professor in that nursing department literally tell his students, some of whom were working for us at the time, that when they graduate they should go off and do real nursing, and then they could always go work with the elder community later on when they sort of want to slow down and not do real nursing anymore.
Wow.
To say that's not that long ago, by the way. That's probably 7-8 years ago, maybe. Right. So,
and that's not unique to your situation. I've heard that from other people in other parts of the country.
Yeah. I had a woman in her 80s. I was talking to her about just about life and what's her experience in terms of aging, and she said, Dave, the hardest thing for me is that I'm now invisible in a crowd.
Yeah.
She said, I can walk, down the mall or at the grocery full of people, and I'm just in the way, and people are looking right through me. And just think about what that says about how we honor and revere our elders. Right?
Exactly.
We have come a long way from that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm really thankful that we're having this conversation, and Katie, that you're sort of at the forefront of championing this work. I have to say, just listening, I feel like I'm learning a lot and recognizing how little we talk about this, and like you said, how insidious and pervasive the problem is. It's really quite sad. And so one of the things I want you to comment on Katie, which Dave and I were talking about earlier, I'm hearing a lot of conversation around the presidential election that's coming up in 2020, and the number of older adult candidates that are in the race, and whether they are quote unquote too old, and concerns about cognitive decline, which your comment about assuming cognitive decline sort of prompted this for me. What do you think about when you hear those debates, when people say such and such candidate is too old? We don't need old candidates running for president. What would you say to those folks that make those comments?
So my response to that is that it just makes me incredibly sad to think that age is even an issue, a factor, that people even think about age. I mean, they could say the same thing about somebody's too young, and that would be a wrong thing to say in my mind. So to me, age should not even be in the equation. And when it becomes part of the equation, then ageism creeps right in.
So, Katie, what can we do? What can we do to start to combat ageism every day? How can we change the conversation?
Well, I think one thing we can do is just to recognize it when it happens. And what I've noticed since LeadingAge has declared this, America Freed from Ageism as its vision, is that the more we talk about it, the more we get these aha moments from people where they're actually recognizing, yes, that was wrong, that was ageist, and actually being able to articulate the fact that this was not a good situation. Call it out when you see it. Dr. Becca Levy from Yale has done some very interesting work on ageism, and she has learned that when older people feel as if they're being discriminated against, it really has a negative impact on their health. And those who have and their self-perception of themselves as an older adult. But when they have positive self-perceptions of aging, they live longer. They live 7.5 years longer than those with less positive perception of aging. So in my mind, we owe it to older adults to call it out and to try to reverse this, this sort of what has become a phenomena, I think, in our country. Now, we know as LeadingAge and as organizations like Wellspring and others around the country, we can only take so much of a bite out of this apple. I mean, this is a big issue. But so I think our role as providers of services for older adults in communities all across the country is to start raising awareness about it, start talking about it, making it part of our conversations, not hide behind it, because I think only that way will people begin to recognize it as something that needs to change.
I think that's well said. So, Katie, I want to sort of expand that a little bit and have you, if you would, describe for us what does an America freed from aging look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it is a country in which the way we think, the way we act, the way we talk about people, sort of regardless of age, reflects respect, inclusivity, and we honor the individuality, the wisdom, the abilities, and the dignity of each person, regardless of their age. So age becomes a non-factor, I think. And that sort of goes back to the answer to the question about the presidentials. It shouldn't be a factor in how we think about people.
Well said.
So, Katie, I actually have a question for you. So, I'm sure there was a point in your journey so far as LeadingAge CEO where this became very real for you, whether it was a story or whether you were visiting a site. Can you share kind of when this hit you and when you said, okay, this really makes a lot of sense to me?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are two examples. One is that I have a 95-year-old dad who is cognitively intact. And I went with him to a doctor's appointment because he has some mobility limitations and he just needs somebody with him. And the doctor spoke only to me. He was talking to me about my dad. He wasn't talking to my dad. He was talking to me. Just so the assumption there was my dad couldn't understand what he was talking about, probably couldn't hear, maybe wouldn't be able to understand it. So he needed to address his conversation to me. And I thought, this is wrong. My dad's a smart guy. He can hear this stuff. He can respond. I don't have to respond for him. So that was something that really struck me as being, wow. But then, within the LeadingAge community, I've seen so many times that we've referred to the notion of, for example, in putting somebody in a memory support unit and describing the goal as retaining self-worth. So the assumption behind that is implicit that with a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease or other dementing illness, your self-worth is in question. So, from my mind, it's one thing for a person to say they feel a challenge to their self-worth because of what they're facing and the losses that come with cognitive impairment. But it's an entirely different thing for someone else to suggest that self-worth is in question. So when I began to think about my own personal example and then how I see some of the language and references that we use in our own member communities, I began to think, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So what can we do about it? So I think we need to hold a mirror up to ourselves and think hard about how we're talking about what we do, how we're talking to the people that we serve, how we're trying to understand their lives, what's important to them as people, as individuals, with dignity, with respect. And then, obviously there's huge work to do with Hollywood and Madison Avenue and things that are well beyond our purview. But hopefully we can, just tweak them a little bit.
Yeah, that's a conversation worth having, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
It is a conversation worth having.
Yeah.
I wonder, Katie, from a policy advocacy standpoint, which is something that LeadingAge does and something you've been involved in, are there specific policies or areas that one could advocate around or educate legislators about with regard to ageism that you would suggest or that LeadingAge is working on?
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit of everything that we do, and we don't miss an opportunity to talk about the fact that, it's a hard one because we don't want to be starting to pit populations against each other, which is the risk you run by saying we need more funding for older Americans, which means less money for younger Americans. That's not our point. But, we've done a lot of work on long-term care financing. And that's a perfect example where, we have a real need in this country, and yet it's being totally overlooked by policymakers. And a lot of it is that there's an assumption that, I think, this is my opinion here, that because we have Social Security and Medicare, we've taken care of older adults and they don't have any additional needs. And that's, to me, sort of a convenient brush off. So we use every opportunity that we can. We're coming up on World Elder Abuse Day. And that's an opportunity for us to talk about talk about ageism in the context of abuse and neglect. And so there's not a bill or a piece of legislation. It's a part of everything, our entire advocacy agenda. We're getting more and more involved in workforce policy issues. And, clearly there are, for example, apprentice programs through the Department of Labor that focus on all kinds of things, but nothing in aging. So why not? We've got plenty of great jobs in aging that could benefit from an apprenticeship program. Why not? So we may not say it's ageism, but it is ageism at some level, and it's an opportunity for us to talk about the need to invest in older adults just as we invest in other populations.
So, Katie, for folks who are going to listen to this podcast in the future, and hopefully, over time, this will help get the message out. Where would we want to drive them to learn more about what we're doing at LeadingAge and sort of where the field is trying to go with this?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So we have on our website a lot of www.leadingage.org, a lot of resources, including we have a podcast episode on ageism. We have a podcast series called Aging Unmasked, and ageism is one of the issues. But we also have developed this video training program. It's training and it's more awareness for member organizations to use with their staff, with their boards, with their residents. It really just includes a number of examples of ageism. It talks about what ageism is, a number of examples of how it manifests itself. And then the point of it is to really stimulate a conversation. How is it manifest in our organization? What can we do about it? What are examples that you've seen? Are there ways that we want to focus on ageism within our member organization? So that's us. That's in our learning hub on our website.
Great.
And I think it's a great tool. Was done with lots of focus groups with members and with residents and with boards so that we sort of made it real for the intended audience.
Yeah.
So check it out.
That's great. Yeah, I've seen some of those tools and resources. They're really, really well done. So, Katie, before Jill grabs the mic from me and calls this to a close, I just want to say thank you for being with us, certainly, but also just thank you for what you're doing for the field. You're a fabulous leader for the cause, and it's a privilege and a blessing to know you and to be able to work alongside you sometimes.
Well, Dave, I feel the same way about you, so thank you.
I can't grab the mic from that. That was a perfect way to end.
There you go.
But Katie, I do remember the first time I ever met you and saw you on that big stage at the LeadingAge National Conference. And as a woman in leadership, especially in senior services, I have to say that I've looked up to you for a lot of years, and just you're doing incredible work, and you have the heart to match. And so that is a duo that every woman hopes that she has, and really men too, right, Sean? Right, Dave?
That's right.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we wrap up, Katie, thank you again for your time, and we definitely will do our best to educate people in Michigan and hopefully nationally just about ageism and drive people to the resources that you described earlier. So thank you all for listening, and we look forward to hopefully you joining us for the next episode of Real People, Real Hope.
Thank you. Thank you for talking about ageism.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you, Katie.
All right.
Bye
Take
now.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.